There we go. Recording in progress. Right. The aims and objectives of this morning's workshop. We're going to be exploring what anxiety is. So at its basic level, what is anxiety? We're then going to have a look at how anxiety presents in neurodiverse children. And the second half of this morning's workshop, we're going to go through a big bank of strategies to empower your child to manage their emotions and support their anxiety with you as a parent carer. Right, so these are the topics for this morning. We're going to start with what is anxiety. We're going to cover a quick overview of autism as well. We're then going to have a look at the link between anxiety and neurodiversity. We're going to touch upon meltdowns and demand avoidance before we go through emotional literacy and some more strategies and resources. So we're going to start off with what is anxiety? Well, anxiety is a chemical response in your brain. It's your fight or flight response. It's a big boost in adrenaline. It's a big boost in cortisol, and it is a normal part of everyday life. Feeling anxious is normal. Everybody feels certain levels of anxiety. Please note, I'm not talking about disordered levels of anxiety right now. I'm talking about typical levels of anxiety. It's a normal part of everyday life. And anxiety motivates us to meet deadlines. If we feel a bit anxious about getting your work done on time, it's quite helpful. You feel a bit anxious, it motivates you to get on with something. Anxiety can be a protective factor. Feel a bit anxious walking this close to the edge of the cliff on holiday near the beach, so I'm going to walk a little bit further away where I'm safer. It's a chemical response in your brain that tells you something needs to happen to keep you safe. And what happens when you're anxious? Well, in the brain, we just said there's cortisol and adrenaline, big rush of those neurotransmitters. With symptoms, you get an increased heart rate, because this is your caveman brain kicking in. That fight or flight response, you're getting ready to fight the woolly mammoth or flight, escape from it, get your family away from danger, fight or flight. So you have an increased heart rate. Your heart is pumping more blood around your body. You'll get shorter, sharper breaths to get more oxygen into your system. Get increased oxygen, and then the increased heart rate gets that oxygenated blood around your body. So you're ready to fight or flight. You get that butterflies in your stomach feeling. You know the butterflies in your stomach feeling? Because you don't need to start worrying about where your next meal is going to come from if your whole family is under attack by a woolly mammoth. You need to deal with the problem at hand and not worry about that. And you are hyper alert. So you don't sit back and relax when you're anxious. You're focusing on a lot of things. What do I need to look out for? I'm looking out for danger. I'm not going to sit back. I'm going to be on the edge of my seat, so I'm ready to stand up when I need to. Maybe looking around, looking over your shoulder, quite restless. And that's because you're looking out for things that make you, well, for the things that have made you anxious. I'm looking out for perceived threat. Those are the symptoms of anxiety. So that's what happens. Now, where does it come from? It usually comes from a place of accumulative stress. So a stressful thing will add up. So it's one more thing on your to-do list, one more job to do, one more thing. Can you just go and do this? And you put it on your to-do list. And you get one more unexpected bill come through. You get a parking fine from 6 months ago. You had no idea that was going to come. And then you get just one more bedtime story. Then the Bank of England put the base rates up again, and your rent and your mortgage goes up just a little bit more every month. And then you get, oh, by the way, it's Victorian Day at school tomorrow. Can you just go and make me a costume? It adds up, it adds up, it adds up. It becomes one more, one more, one more. And then we get to the last straw and we catastrophize. Your catastrophic thinking kicks in. That's when you can't think of anything else. You can't compartmentalize and just move on or deal with it later. You're in the moment. You can't think of anything else. It's not going to get better. It's going to be this way forever. Your rational thought has gone and your fight or flight kicks in. We then have a period of emotional recovery where we start to regulate. Heart rate decreases, cortisol and adrenaline decrease. Oxygen flow goes back to a normal level. then your rational thought kicks back in and you're better able to deal with the situation. That's a very natural cycle of anxiety. So, I'm not going to ask you to do this out loud, but you may have been doing this already. In your head, do you recognize that cycle of anxiety? Can you see that happening? You're more than welcome to share your own experiences in the chat if you wish to do so, but I understand this is a very personal question. You may not wish to say this out loud. You may not wish to share this, that's fine. But how do you recognize when you're anxious? Do you recognize those physiological symptoms? Do you recognize the catastrophic thought processes? How do you recognize when you are feeling heightened? And the reason I ask that is because you cannot regulate someone else's anxiety if you cannot regulate your own. It's putting your own life jacket on first. You need to be able to regulate your own anxiety before you can regulate someone else's. Otherwise, it becomes the blind leading the blind, the anxious leading the anxious. As a parent carer, we need to be in control of our own anxiety or able to regulate it as best we can before we can start regulating someone else. Excuse me. So Carolina has shared in the chat. Thank you, Carolina. You recognize that tight chest, the feelings of anger, the feeling of out of control. Yeah, real common feeling with anxiety. The more things that we can control, the less anxious we feel. The more in control you are, the less anxious you are, quite often. Therefore, when feeling anxious, it can be quite common to try and control more things. If I can control more things in my environment, I'll probably be less anxious. Colin shared, yes, you can prescribe to those. You also have chest pains and a tremor and a stutter. Absolutely, yeah, it can affect your speech as well. It affects your thought patterns. Lovely. Thank you all so much for sharing. I appreciate that. Okay, that was a very quick whistle-stop tour of anxiety. Where it comes from, where does it go? What are the physiological symptoms? How does it work? Next up, I just want to have a quick overview of autism. Now, I know many of you will have been on our Understanding Autism workshop before, so I'm just going to do a quick recap before putting this into context. Now, when it comes to autism, there are two different models that we can explore. The first is the medical model of disability. The medical model of disability suggests that if you are disabled, it is because of you. You are the problem. You need to be cured. You need to change to fit in. There is something wrong with you, and that's what your disability is. And when that is cured, you'll be better, and you won't be disabled anymore. That medical model of disability led to my least favourite Venn diagram, and I do rank them. Have any of you come across the triad of impairments before? Some of you may have come across or heard of it, the triad of impairments. Most of you shaking your heads. No, lovely, good. It's a horrible Venn diagram, three circles, the triad, and it tells you three things that you're really bad at as an autistic person. Three things that you can't do, three things that are wrong with you as an autistic. Now, for a lot of people going through the diagnostic process, going through the process of diagnosis, it's quite deep, quite soul-searching. Takes a very long time. For some, it can be quite expensive if you don't want to go via the long NHS waiting list. And if you spent your life wondering why you feel different to your peers, friends, and family, why do I perceive the world differently from those around me? And after all that soul-searching, time and money, you then get met with a big Venn diagram that tells you three things that are wrong with you, three things that you're really bad at. That has a real bad effect on your mental health. Now, the other way we can have a look at autism is using the social model of disability. The social model of disability suggests that you are not disabled because of who you are. The social model of disability suggests that you are disabled because of barriers to your environment. If I flip this and let's say that everybody in a position of power, so that's local government, national government, local politics, national politics, building regulations, everything like that. If every single person in that position of power had a visual impairment, then society would be set up primarily for those who have a visual impairment. If they were the typical population were visually impaired, then every cinema, every gym, every shop, every level crossing, every pedestrian crossing, every train station and bus service would be set up and designed for people with visual impairments. Therefore, Braille and audio adaptations would be the standard. Written text would be available if you ask. Everywhere would be white cane friendly. Everywhere would welcome guide dogs. So to what extent would that person be disabled in that environment? Because if absolutely everything is set up for you by people with your needs, what are you disabled from doing? What are your barriers to society? If we use that model with autism, we get rid of those triad of impairments and look at what's wrong with you, but we have a look at 4 key areas of difference. And we can use that same social model of disability with many, many forms of neurodiversity. But with autism, this is from the Autism Education Trust, the AET. It's an organisation that stems from the National Autistic Society. And it has a look at the 4 key areas that are different about autistic people compared to neurotypical people. It doesn't say what's wrong with you. It says what your barriers are. What are your barriers to society? Well, actually, what are society's barriers to you accessing them? And those 4 key areas are interaction. The way that you interact with others will be different. So young children may play differently to their peers. A lot of neurotypical children will quite happily pick up plastic dolls and Lego figures, and they will have a whole life of their own, and they will go and play and explore. Some autistic children will pick up Lego figures and dolls and think it's absolutely absurd that that a lump of plastic has a family and thoughts and feelings. How weird to animate this lump of plastic. And may prefer actually to line up their toys. They may prefer to examine them, dress them up, see what they look like, so they look like from different angles. It's a different way of playing. It's not a worse way. It's not an impaired way of playing. It's a difference. Developing relationships as well. Many autistic people will prefer to have smaller social circles. They may prefer to have more functional relationships. I have friends that I go out to the park with, and that's what we do. We leave it there. I have some friends at school. I have some friends at work, but they're not my friends when I'm at home. So we've got difference in relationships as well. Different interactions, different play, different relationships. Some interactions might be quite repetitive. Some autistic people may prefer to have quite similar social interactions. They may ask the same questions when you see somebody. And that repetition is quite comforting to a lot of us as well. The next is information processing, or the way you process information. Your attention, your interests, and how you learn will be different. Now, Luke Jackson, he's a wonderful advocate. He says that due to his autism, due to the way that he thinks, he's either passionately interested in something or not at all. It's that quite black or white thinking. I'm either in it for the long run or I'm not at all. Black and white thinking. Now, in terms of interests as well, there's still a myth going around that autistic people have this savant ability to know absolutely everything about certain subjects, but it's not the case. If you are less interested in social interaction, you have more time on your hands because it's less meaningful to you. If you prefer quite repetitive interactions or quite repetitive thought processes, you're better suited or more likely to you're still more likely to learn about to gain more interest, sorry, about a certain subject. So it's not a savant ability. If you have more time on your hands and the way your brain is wired, because you're autistic, you are more likely to gain more interest in a certain interest. Now, they're quite often called special interests. Some of you may have heard the term special interest. But you only ever seem to have a special interest when you have special needs. Because I've got plenty of neurotypical friends that can name every England footballer from 1969 to present day, what number they are, how many goals they scored per season. But they're just very interested, they're passionate about their hobby. But my autistic friends and colleagues that have that same level of interest in the taxonomy of South African beetles, that's their special interest because they've got special needs. So personally, I prefer the term intense interest. And the reason I'm dwelling on that, we're going to come back more to the intense interests later. Now, sensory processing. Most neurodivergent people will have, well, every neurodivergent person will have their own sensory profile. Now, when I was at school, I had 5 senses. Turns out we have 8 now. So the main 5 senses, you may be oversensitive, hypersensitive, or undersensitive. Over or undersensitive. So you may over-register you visually. So in quite a busy environment, you may take in all of that visual environment. In very bright environments, you may over-register all of the light. That's natural sunlight and overhead lighting, so it can be quite overwhelming. If you're hyposensitive, undersensitive to taste, then you would probably seek out quite strong flavours, quite salty flavours, overly sweet, because you're under-registering, so you're seeking it out. So you have people who are oversensitive and will avoid, and people who are undersensitive and will seek. And that says it applies to your 5 main senses. But the other 3 that we have are your sense of balance, your vestibular sense, your body awareness or your proprioception, so that's where your body is in space. You use that sense when you duck under, a low doorway, when you turn sideways to squeeze past someone. You use it to copy the physiotherapist to raise your arm in the air for the exercise you prescribed, knowing where your body is in space. The 8th sense is your interoception, internal sense, interoception. And that's knowing when you're hungry or full. It's knowing if you're hot or cold. It's knowing when you feel ill. And it's also knowing what your emotions are, including that sense of anxiety. You may over-register that and be very sensitive to any change in your interoception, or you may under-register that. You may not register when you're feeling very anxious. We'll come back to that a little bit more later. And communication. Communication is different in many autistic people. The way people communicate, understand, and use language is a difference. To summarize, autistic people will see, hear, and feel the world differently to other people. Keyword is differently. If you are autistic, you're autistic for life. It's not an illness nor a disease and cannot and should not be cured. And that is that social model of disability. Okay. Next, I want to talk about anxiety and neurodiversity in young children. Now, for many children, regardless of your neurotype, emotions can be really difficult to understand, especially the more complex ones. When it comes to neurodivergent children, emotions may be more difficult to understand. If you have that sensory difference, where you don't quite register that interoception, it'd be quite difficult to process what's happening inside of me. All those physiological symptoms we talked about earlier, increased body temperature, that stutter, feelings of butterflies in your stomach. If you over-register that can be quite overwhelming. If you under-register it, you may not be aware of your own anxiety levels. Now, many autistics are visual learners. Will learn through seeing, show me, and I can do it. Many ADHDers are very much kinesthetic learners, learn through doing. Let me do it, and I can do it myself. But with emotions, they're not physical. They're not something that you can pick up. You can't pick up anxiety in your hand and feel how heavy it is and roll it between your hands, see whether it's smooth or rough. You can't pick up embarrassment and see how heavy it is and see whether it has sharp edges or smooth edges. A lot of the more complex emotions are a balance of different chemicals in our brain. So trying to understand that is quite difficult for a lot of neurodiverse children. It's quite a complex process. Therefore, when experiencing high levels of stress and anxiety, trying to understand it can make it worse because it's one more thing on that to-do list. Why are my palms sweaty? Why can I not sit still? Why can't I sit back in my chair and relax? Why do I keep looking over my shoulder? Why is my heart rate increased? What's happening? It's one more thing and one more thing. Now, for some children, some neurodiverse children, they may express that anxiety in different ways to your neurotypical children. The most common one we see is, I've got a tummy ache, or I feel ill. Because that increased body temperature, can't really rest. That butterflies in your stomach. Those are all very similar to when you have a stomach virus. So feeling ill, having a tummy ache, can feel very similar to feeling anxious. So you may hear, I feel ill, I've got a stomach ache. You might see that your child withdraws as well. Someone who's normally quite forward starts to withdraw. That could be that flight response. Likewise, you may see them hyperactive, they're way more energetic than normal. So change in behavior, withdrawal or hyperactivity. Likewise, more or less vocal, depending on that fight or that flight response. Again, being very restless and bringing up past events. Bringing up past events. Now, if you find it very difficult in the moment to label how you're feeling, put a label on it. Well, actually, firstly, I need to identify what emotion I need to talk about. Then I need to label it correctly. I then need to translate all of those emotions into speech. Then I need to make sure that you can understand that speech and I'm communicating effectively. Quite a lot of steps in expressing anxiety. So one quite common expression of anxiety you may see is bringing up past events. So we collect our children from school and say, oh, how was your day? Go, yeah, it was absolutely fine. I really miss Grandma. And Grandma passed away 4 years ago, and we haven't spoken about Grandma in about 2 years, really. But suddenly I really miss Grandma. Because how I feel right now is how I felt when Grandma passed away. I recognise this feeling. This is how I felt when Grandma passed. So bringing up past events can be an expression of anxiety or low mood. If I can't label what I'm feeling right now, I can label the last time I felt like this. I can label that event. Right, did you have a good time with your friends today? Oh, yeah, absolutely fine. I really wish we could have the hamster back. Bringing up those past events can be a communication of anxiety for a lot of neurodivergent children, especially those that find it difficult to label, process, and communicate more complex emotions, anxiety, and low mood. Bringing up past events is quite an effective method of communicating how you feel. You're also likely to see tiredness. Being anxious and being low mood really zaps your energy. Very tired. And stimming and an increase in those repetitive behaviours. Often either because you're hypervigilant or in an attempt to try and self-soothe. You may see an increase in those repetitive behaviours. Now, our next activity, I'm asking you about your child. How does your child express themselves? There was quite a lot of nodding there, so I think I know the answer to this so far. But does your child express themselves in any of the ways that we've discussed so far? Do you recognise any of those behaviours? And I'll leave that slide up, and I'm going to check in on the chat because I can see we've had a bit of activity. Oh, lots of chat. Lovely. Carolina, maybe this explains why my autistic son seeks physical pain when heightened in anxiety. When he's very anxious or having a panic attack, he has a compulsion to do things he dislikes, like rubbing his hands against the carpet, putting his hand with a tight grip around his neck. Yeah, absolutely. I would, if he's seeking out any form of physical pain when very heightened, Carolina, I would suggest a referral for some support with that. Our family support team would be more than happy to discuss that one in more detail as well. Light bulb moment there as well. Zoe says, is accidents such as wetting themselves an indication too? Yes, of anxiety. Sometimes if you're so anxious, you may be going through all of that, going through everything that we've been talking about. It may distract you from your physiological needs, so you may have accidents if you're very anxious. Yeah, if anxious thoughts, you're placing so much importance on those anxious thoughts, then yeah, you may miss those cues, such as sweating. Yeah. Sarah, who's not Adam, yeah, really helped. Your child expresses themselves through lots of those. Past events coming up a lot, past events, withdrawal and tiredness. Fantastic. Lovely. Bringing up past events is something I have no idea would show ways of anxiety. Makes a lot of sense. Okay, yeah. So the past events one has come up, and a lot of bells there. Fantastic. Thank you all so much for sharing. I really appreciate that. Okay. Now, next we're going to have a look at the crossover between periods of ill health and neurodiversity. Now, autism and ADHD can often intensify many thought processes associated with very high levels of anxiety. So when you have those very high levels of anxiety, you have those feelings of high alert and feelings of threat. But also being neurodiverse, so either those 4 key areas of difference that we spoke about earlier, those with ADHD, may often feel on high alert or have those feelings of threat throughout the day, because the world isn't governed and run by neurodiverse people. By and large, the world is governed and run by neurotypical people. We wouldn't have SEN-friendly sessions at the trampoline park if the trampoline park was already built by and for neurodiverse children. You wouldn't have to have a dedicated hour. It would already be open. Same with the supermarkets, wouldn't have, the neurodiverse friendly hour to go shopping. You'd be able to go shopping at any time. So sometimes just leaving the house can put you on those feelings of high alert and then feelings of threat. When you feel anxious, you also have those feelings of high alert and threat. So being neurodiverse and having very high levels of anxiety, those feelings of threat, those feelings of high alert increase more because you're getting it from 2 angles. Your executive functioning difficulties. So executive functioning is your brain kind of organizing itself. So when I need to get ready for work in the morning, I need to wake up early enough so I go and tidy the kitchen. I need to make sure my daughter's awake at the right time and she's dressed and clean and ready and I'm dressed and clean and ready. All that needs to coordinate to get in the car before the traffic hits. And then I need to make sure I've got time to go off and get some lunch before I get to work. So that's my brain's executive functioning. I'm planning, I'm organizing, I'm prioritizing, being flexible with my approach. Many neurodiverse children will need support with their executive functioning or may have executive functioning difficulties, a support need of being able to organize your thoughts. When you're anxious, your executive functioning skills decrease. because your brain isn't able to rationalize your thought and organize it. Your brain isn't able to calm things down and plan things meticulously because you're in panic mode, you're in that fight or flight. Therefore, when you're neurodiverse and going through a period of high anxiety, those executive functioning difficulties will increase from 2 angles. Overanalysis of language. Many neurodivergents will say that they do overanalyze language because neurotypicals love relying on body language, facial expressions, and tone of voice. Whereas you're neurodiverse, just say what you mean and mean what you say. Much more straightforward way of communicating. So if you're neurodiverse, trying to pick up on, have I missed body language? Have I missed tone of voice? Was there something I missed there? What did they really mean when they said that? Overanalyzing language. When you're anxious, you tend to overanalyze language as well because of that hypervigilance. We spoke about right at the beginning, that hypervigilance. So the 2 goes hand in hand, and the overanalysis of language increases 2-fold. Your central coherence. So having weak central coherence means you don't see the bigger picture. So you're looking at context of things. Again, being neurodiverse, a lot of neurodiverse children are very good at spotting fine details, looking at things through a narrow lens, excluding a lot of background distractions and just looking at details. Sometimes missing wider context. When you're anxious, you may also look through things with quite a narrow lens and miss that the wider context. So your context processing is affected 2-fold if you're neurodiverse and going through a period of high anxiety. Information and context processing. Theory of mind, which is assumed shared thoughts and emotions. You might get at home, you should know why I'm upset. You should know why I don't want to talk right now. You should be able to read how I'm feeling right now. Or it's a difficult day at school today, you shouldn't have to ask. So that assumed shared thoughts. Again, this is a conversation all on its own, and we do cover this in our Autism Plus talk as well. But theory of mind is assuming that other people have the same knowledge as you. So I assume that you know what I know. I assume that you have the same context as me. That can increase when you're anxious and when you're neurodiverse, assuming that people already know what you're thinking without the need to communicate it. Having strong emotions and poor impulse control. So those who have an impulsive ADHD in your life, you may notice that impulse control really heightens when they're going through a period of high anxiety. Difficulty generalizing and learning from past experiences, they also increase. Where especially autistics are very specific learners. Show me something and I would do it exactly like that. So sometimes some autistic children may have difficulty generalizing and go, well, the last time I was late for school, it was because I took a different route because of the, but there was too much traffic. So I had to take a different route where it was easier to cross the road. But you may not use that same level of thinking for being late to an appointment or being late to work. But just when I go to school, I need to make sure that I leave an extra 5 minutes. So generalizing is, right, well, anywhere I go, I might need to have an extra 5 minutes to account for getting lost or account for anything, account for any unpredictable difficulties on my way to where I'm going. But some neurodivergent children will just apply that to school because it was just school that I was 5 minutes late once. So that's generalizing or learning from a past experience. That can also increase when you're anxious. Because again, your brain needs to stop, access a problem that you've had before, see what the solution was, and apply that to the current context. That can be very difficult when you're anxious, can be difficult when you're a neurodivergent child, so the 2 go hand in hand and increase. Looking through a narrow lens, we've covered strong and intense emotions. Yep, stronger fight or flight responses, and difficulties problem solving and thinking of alternative responses. There's been a lot of activity in the chat. Emily and Alistair ask, is a strong sense of justice or injustice one of them? Yes, absolutely. Yep, that's definitely. Having a strong sense of, what's right and wrong is very much a part of being neurodiverse. I think our neurodiverse children have a great sense of justice and will stand up for what they believe in. When you're anxious, that can be really heightened as well. So the two go hand in hand. Yeah. Tony, my daughter complains of a tummy ache a lot. She's very hyper and struggles to go to sleep, struggles to focus on anything, and she brings up past events. She's been taken to hospital, had her eyes checked, and there's nothing wrong. Yeah, absolutely. That could be signs of anxiety as well. It could be. Oh yeah, a lot of you agreeing with Emily and Alistair about the sense of injustice being heightened as well. Lovely. Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. Okay. I'm going to touch upon low mood as well, as anxiety and low mood can often go hand in hand. I just want to touch upon it quickly. Now, many neurodiverse people will have an intense interest, again, sometimes called special interests in the autistic community, sometimes called hyperfixations in the ADHD community. Call it what you will, they're intense interests. What we often see in, it says autistic children, I'd go as far to say most neurodiverse children, you may see a change in those intense interests to themes of death and despair. Quite macabre and morbid topics. Maybe I start reading horror books, like Goosebumps books. They're so outdated now, aren't they? They're very 90s, the Goosebumps books. Having a look at, researching how people feel in that moment. So you start watching horror films, scarier things, quite dark topics. Some parents on this workshop before have gone gravestones. There's been quite a few that said, my child suddenly has an interest in churchyards and gravestones. The reason for that is, the reason for that change in intense interest is especially autistics are very good solo researchers. Many of my autistic friends and colleagues will say that I'm much better off just going off and researching something on my own rather than learning in a group. So if I go and research how other people experience this, what are other people responding to those themes of death and despair? How are other people responding to these macabre and morbid topics? What does it look like in them? It's a very logical solution. So if I research everyone else and see how they're doing, I may be better equipped to understand my own low mood, my own feelings of despair and macabre. So it can be that you start having a look at, those intense interests. Carolina says, what age could this occur? My son is 10 and we haven't experienced this. It can be from any age, kind of age appropriate. It may be, I start thinking about churches or funerals, or I think someone said Remembrance Sunday as well. I wouldn't worry about it too much. If your child may not express themselves like this is just one way an autistic child may express low mood. But I wouldn't worry about it. If it does happen, that may be an indication of low mood. It may not be, but it's something to think about as well. Zoe, my daughter has a fascination on serial killers. That just seems to be a very popular at the moment. True crime, all of these true crime novels. Yeah, Sarah's part of that club as well. You love a bit of true crime. I don't get it personally, but yeah, that may not be an indication of low mood. It could be. I couldn't speak on your daughter's behalf, but yeah, but I think true crime is very accessible at the moment as well and very popular. But yeah, it's a interesting topic within itself. So you may also see a bit more anger. So if I can get angry enough, I can discharge these negative feelings, get rid of them, get them out of my system. Again, if I can't self-reflect or conceptualize these emotions or communicate those more complex thoughts, those more complex feelings, that can lead to aggressive behavior because you're frustrated. How frustrated is it to go through a period of low mood and not be able to express that? So you might actually express that through anger and frustration as well. But, Lucas says, you keep referring to autism, but I suspect more ADHD in my daughter. Could most of this still apply? Yeah, absolutely. I'm talking kind of generally. I'm trying to kind of cover the differences between ADHD and autism where appropriate. But a lot of this is neurodiverse anxiety as well. Okay, now we've been talking about quite dark and macabre things so far, so let's have a new word. I like this word. This is alexithymia. Some of you may have heard it before, alexithymia. So alexithymia is the inability to identify and describe emotions in the self. The core characteristics are a marked dysfunction in emotional awareness, social attachment, and interpersonal relating. It's quite a wordy definition. So we could call it a reduced language to describe different emotions, or no language for your worries. This is particularly pertinent to the subtle and complex emotions. Now, fingers on buzzers, 10 points if you've ever had a conversation that looks a bit like this. You go to your child and you say, how are you feeling? How are you feeling today? And they say, I don't know. Yep, 10 points if you've ever had that conversation. What your child is probably saying when they say, I don't know, they're going, I don't know which part of the many emotions I'm experiencing to identify, how to correctly label it before translating those feelings into speech and making sure that you can understand that speech. That is alexithymia. How do I convert all of these emotions into the English language or any form of language? So it's the inability to describe the emotions within yourself. There is a name for it. It's something that can develop over time as well. We go through strategies to support alexithymia and support emotional literacy. But yeah, that is alexithymia in a nutshell. I don't know which part of the many emotions I'm experiencing to identify, how to correctly label it before translating those feelings into speech that you can understand. Okay, our next topic is object permanence. Some of you come across object permanence before? Object permanence, it's knowing that something continues to exist once it cannot be observed anymore. So we usually talk about this in kind of children and babies. You know, you hold up the rattle, you play with the rattle, and then the rattle goes behind dad's head. And in the baby's mind, that has disappeared off the face of the earth because I can't see it anymore. It's the best magic trick in the world because you've made it actually disappear from existence. It's gone forever. And then the magic continues because you pull the rattle back from behind your head. It's back again. And wow, you've magicked it up out of thin air. That's why peekaboo is so exciting to many, children, babies, because of that object permanence. If I can't see it, it doesn't exist. If I can see it, it does exist. Now, object permanence, despite the name object permanence, doesn't just relate to objects. This can be, this can relate to people or feelings, experiences. And this can lead to meltdowns or high anxiety levels at the end of an enjoyable activity. Because what if this enjoyable activity never comes back again? In, again, neurodiverse people, this may take longer to support or may need support once it has developed. So Wen Lawson is a fantastic speaker. He is a university lecturer working in Australia. And he once said on the subject of object permanence, his family went on holiday. He lived in Australia. His family went on holiday. He didn't want to come. It was too many transitions for him. So he said, "Oh, you guys go. Have a great holiday. I'm going to stay here." He woke up the next morning. He couldn't see his family. He assumed they were all dead and kidnapped because he couldn't see them. They were gone forever. And that was his object permanence. When he woke up, he always sees his family. They were gone. So in his mind, they were gone forever. Now, this is back in the days when money was physical and you could actually hold it and pay with things. So he was using his wallet every day to buy coffees and buy lunch. He put a picture of his family in his wallet, and that picture helped him to process that object permanence and go, actually, they're not dead, they're just on holiday. This is a world-renowned university lecturer that travels internationally. There is no link between your intelligence or your academic capabilities and your object permanence. So it may need support once developed. So it might be, I really struggle knowing if an object or a person will return. I really struggle to come off of the Xbox because what if I don't get this same level of enjoyment? What if my friends are never all online again together? What if it never feels that good again? What if, someone just put in the chat, what if someone doesn't come back from putting the bins out? What if they don't come back? Carolina says, how do you support this? The use of visuals. Again, we come on to whole banks of strategies at the end, but with object permanence, you generally support this with whatever the activity is, scheduling it in a visual sense. So when use that picture of his family to remind himself that his family hadn't gone forever. But to support object permanence, so you have finished playing on the Xbox for today. You can't play on it all night. That time has come to an end. But we're going to schedule in tomorrow from 6 to 7 p.m. That's your hour, and it will come back again. And again, some of it is just child development. Some of it is supported with visuals. It's something that can develop over time. Lovely. Right, a few more questions coming in. Could object permanence be the same as separation anxiety? There are links to it. Yeah, I couldn't talk about that in great depth, as I'm by no means an expert on separation anxiety. But in neurodiverse children, there may be a link, yes. Right. What's the time? Yes, I'm going to do this now. Now, many neurodiverse children will have that sensory processing needs or an individual, sensory profile. Some sensory experiences can cause high levels of anxiety, like we were speaking about earlier. When your sensory needs are not met, or if you're in kind of sensory overload, it could be really distressing. If you're over-registering everything, you constantly have to seek something out in order to feel balanced, can bring a lot of anxiety with it in order to feel, that sense of balance. I think the best example I can think of with sensory overload is Big Tesco on a Saturday afternoon. Yeah, a lot of you physically recoiling from the camera there in case I actually magic it into your room. Yes, I don't know if any of you have ever gone to Big Tesco on a Saturday afternoon on purpose, but it is one of the worst experiences in the world. So, when you go to Big Tesco on the Saturday afternoon, we have you can't park in the same place twice. Everything gets moved around as well. They never keep the shelves the same. There's people everywhere. You're bumping into trolleys. You have to squeeze past people. You have to reach across people. They're reaching across you. The music is loud. The lights are bright. There's a lot of beeping. You can smell lots of different deodorants and perfumes everywhere and free samples. It's a lot of sensory information all at once, and it becomes too much, and you just want to leave. That fight or flight response really kicks in. You just want to leave. That is sensory overload. For many neurodiverse children, sometimes just leaving the house can feel like that on certain days. If you're over-registering, just going to school can feel like that sometimes. A lot of people chipping in with their own experiences of sensory overload. Thank you, everyone. Trampoline parks on a Saturday morning. Yeah. Any sort of weekend park, birthday parties. Yeah, absolutely. Francis says, what is it meant when someone's sensory needs are not met? So that is when, if you over-register, so you over-register sight and you're in a very visually busy environment, there's not any blank space on the walls, there's a lot of colours and textures, differences everywhere, a lot of information. You over-register that and you take in all of that, and it can be quite stressful because your brain has to try and process that and find a level of calm. So their needs are not met if there is too much sensory information going in. Likewise, if you're a sensory seeker and you need a certain level to feel calm, you need time to explore those sensory needs and meet those sensory needs. Sarah is always one step ahead of me and has just put in a link to our sensory signs and signals workshop. We also run this as a course, so it's a course and a workshop. You can book on and we do a whole workshop on sensory needs as well. Thank you very much, Sarah. Okay. This is going to be in the handout, and I'm not going to ask you to do this now, but in your house, what is the sensory environment like? We have your list of visuals, your list of sound. We have touch and smell. So those are going to be some things to think about. It's an activity to do outside of this workshop. Right, it is 10:57, so we're going to take a short comfort break. Everyone happy with 10 minutes? Stretch your legs, make a cup of tea. Lovely, fantastic. We're 10:58 now. I'll be generous and stick to the 10 minutes. If we come back at 11:08, 11:08, very specific, isn't it? Yes, 11:08, stretch legs, and I'll see you all in 10 minutes. Thanks, everyone.
Could I just very quickly just ask, I have private messaged a few of you just because I haven't been able to check you in on names. The reason it's important if I check you in is so that we ensure you get the handouts and the link for this recording after the workshop. So if you could just have a quick look, see if I've sent you a private message. There's about five of you, I think. And if you could, that would be awesome, because I don't want you to miss out on the handouts or the link. So thanks very much, everyone.
Right, welcome back, everybody. It's 11:08. We're going to jump in where we left off. Lovely. So before the break, we were talking about the sensory environment. Okay. Off we go. Next topic I want to talk about is meltdowns or crisis. I'll use the terms interchangeably in this. But essentially, a meltdown or going into crisis, a meltdown is when stress and anxiety becomes too much to deal with. And this can look like screaming and shouting and swearing and lashing out, punching, kicking, running away, absconding, ripping, destroying property. Big old meltdown. You may also go into shutdown, which is very different to meltdown. Shutdown is where you very much go in on yourself. You internalize those feelings and you shut yourself away from everyone and everything. We're going to be talking about meltdowns today, very much an external expression of very, very high levels of stress and anxiety. Now, a meltdown is not a temper tantrum. A temper tantrum is when you don't get your own way and it's very frustrating. A meltdown is when someone is completely overwhelmed by their current situation and they temporarily lose behavioral control. Nobody wants to go into meltdown. Nobody says, I'm going to have a meltdown now to get my own way. It's not a chosen behavior to go into meltdown. It's when your stress and anxiety become too much and everything explodes out, overwhelmed. So to support a person in meltdown, firstly, that person's not going to listen to reasoning because that rational thought is not there when your anxiety levels are through the roof. All that person needs to hear in the moment is reassurance to ride that wave of anxiety that we spoke about right at the beginning. And when I say reassurance, I don't mean everything's okay, it's fine. Because in that moment, it's not. If everything was fine, there probably wouldn't be a meltdown. Reassurance relates back to your object permanence. And it's supporting your child to know that this feeling will end. You're not going to feel like this forever. This will pass. This feeling will go and your happiness will return. You're going to feel happy again. This will pass. This will pass. It's okay. You're not going to feel like this forever. This will pass. That's the reassurance that your child will need. It's support with object permanence to know that their happiness will return. I'm here for you. This will pass. Give some time. It does take a while to recover from an overload. Some young people might be very tired after a meltdown. Some young people might be quite embarrassed. I know a number of children I worked with did feel quite embarrassed after a meltdown because it wasn't their choice of behavior. And what you can do in the moment to try and make space is try and make the space wherever you are quiet and soft and calm. Think about those sensory distractions that we were speaking about earlier, those sensory needs. If there are other people around, ask them to move on, not to stare. Turn off any loud music, turn down any bright lights. Think about that sensory overload. Is there anything else sensory-wise that we can do to remove some of that anxiety and make it a quiet, calm, low arousal space? The best thing you can do really, though, is to be proactive as opposed to reactive and anticipate the signs of someone who is becoming closer to a meltdown. So minimize those known triggers and use your child's voice. When I say use your child's voice, I'm not necessarily talking about verbal children. Your pre-verbal or non-verbal or non-speaking child can still have a voice. This may be through observations. It may be watching what your child gravitates towards. But hear what your child has to say about their own levels of anxiety and what would help. and I'd try and identify patterns. Now, we've got resources for this all at the end, so keep those in mind. When we come on to the resources, we'll be able to put this in context. Okay. I'm going to talk about demand avoidance quickly as well. We do a whole workshop on various forms of demand avoidance. We explore ADHD, oppositional defiant disorder, and PDA, pathological demand avoidance, where we go into this in great detail. I'm going to touch upon demand avoidance now, just to put it into context. But PDA, yes, stands for pathological demand avoidance, which is a recognized part of the autism spectrum. PDA is not being diagnosed, as there aren't any medical professionals in the UK that want to diagnose a child with anything pathological. So what is being seen is a diagnosis of autism, and then in brackets, with a demand avoidant profile. So you may see autism with a demand avoidant profile. PDA also, some people are kind of reclaiming the term PDA and calling it the pervasive desire for autonomy, which I really like. Long story short, someone with a demand avoidant profile is someone who has a very high level of need for control. Everyone has a certain baseline need for control. Some people are so laid back that they're horizontal. They don't write things down. They don't have a calendar. They get by through day-to-day life. And they just kind of go with the flow, and they're absolutely fine with that. Some people have a very high level of need for control. Everything needs to go in the calendar. I need to know what's going on. I need to know what everyone else is doing. I need to be in control of this. Generally, those two people end up marrying each other. I don't make the rules. But everyone has that baseline level of need for control. Those with demand avoidant profiles have a very high level of need for control. And therefore, any small demand, and it could be an everyday demand, if that is placed upon that person, I will avoid that demand so I stay in control of my own autonomy. So with a demand avoidant autistic, you might see that person obsessively resisting ordinary demands. I'll just go and pop your shoes away. Do you mind just hanging your coat up? Thank you. Those small everyday demands may be avoided in order to stay in control. But someone brought this up right at the beginning as well. Being in control is a way of reducing levels of anxiety. Many PDAs appear very sociable on the surface, but may not have depth in their understanding, may have very sudden or quick mood swings, may be comfortable in extreme extents in role play and pretending. Because if I role play as the policeman, I can tell all of my friends what to do. But when I'm just Chris, that's me being bossy. Or if I role play as the teacher, I'm allowed to tell all the pupils what to do. But if I'm just Chris, that comes across wrong. Or if I'm a vampire, well, actually, I don't have to go and help with the dishwasher because vampires are nocturnal and you're asking me to do this in the afternoon. So I'm really sorry, but I can't actually do that right now. Well, I'd absolutely love to come and help you in the garden, but as you know, I'm a snake and I haven't got any arms. So sometimes that extreme role play is actually a more passive form of demand avoidance rather than a big, defiant shouting, no, I won't do it. It can also be more passive demand avoidance. I'd love to come and help you in the garden, but as you know, I'm a sub-Saharan snake with no arms, and you need arms to dig with a spade, so I can't help you on this occasion, very sorry. There may be language delay with a good degree of catch-up, usually around the age of 8-ish, and maybe very hyper-focused on people rather than things or certain topics. And almost every demand avoidant autistic I've ever spoken to is absolutely charming and charismatic. That's not part of the diagnostic process, though. Right. So, child with PDA or demand avoidant profile, demand avoidant autistic, or someone who is going through a period of demand avoidance, whether they are autistic or not. But demand avoidance is a way to remain in control. If you are avoiding demands, it's because you want to stay in control of your own autonomy. And even those small ones, do you mind just putting your shoes away? Well, no, because then I'm not in control of myself and I need to stay in control to keep the anxiety at bay. Now, some children who are autistic or some ADHDers may also go through periods of defiant behaviour. Again, this is very likely due to high levels of anxiety. So demand avoidance is very much an anxious behaviour, an anxiety behaviour. It may be caused by not fully understanding a task. Do you mind just unloading the dishwasher for me? So I've recently got a dishwasher. I've been washing things up by hand for the last 8 years. So it's a very exciting week in my household. I've just realised how much I'm talking about that. And I've got that on record as well, how exciting. But yes, that's the example I'm going to stick to. Yes, do you mind just helping me to unload the dishwasher? What if I don't put things back exactly where they're meant to go? What if I get it wrong? I don't put the plates and the cups and the bowls in the right place. Am I going to look stupid? Am I going to look like I don't know how to do that? It's quite a basic task, isn't it? Putting things away. What if I get it wrong? And you're going to think less of me. So rather than go through all of that anxiety, I just say, no, I'm not going to do it. I avoid that demand because I'm not fully sure what it looks like. The emotion as well. Oh, we're just going to nip to the shops quickly and just get some more squash and some more milk and bread on the way home. No, absolutely not. If I refuse to do that, I don't then have to go through the sensory difficulties of going to the shop. So I don't fully understand the emotions I feel when I go to that shop because it's overwhelming. I'm stressed, that alexithymia is there. I don't know how to express that. So if I flat out refuse, I'm not going to feel that level of anxiety. It's an avoidant behaviour. Or a social situation. Oh, we're meeting up with your cousins at the park this weekend. How exciting. I flat out refuse to go. I can't get the social situation wrong. I can't talk about my hyperfixation too much and embarrass myself or my mum. I can't kind of get the unwritten rules of how long you go on the swing for before you pass it on to someone else. Or whose turn is it to push the roundabout and whose turn is it to sit? When do you swap? If I say, no, I'm not going, I can't get that wrong. And that fear of failure is diminished because I can't get it wrong if I don't go. And that fear of ridicule goes. I won't look stupid in front of all of my friends and family if I just don't do it. If I don't do it, I can't get it wrong. There's a really big example of this in Sarah, it was your daughter's year, wasn't it, with the SATs? Apologies if you've already put this in the chat. I know there's quite a lot going on in the chat at the moment, which is brilliant. That's what I love about space workshops. So yeah, Sarah, your daughter's year, there was a lot of demand avoidance when it came to the year 6 SATs. That was the notorious year that got in the newspaper and the radio and the news for being too difficult for 11-year-olds. And there was a very high number of young people who just wouldn't do it. They put their names at the top and just didn't attempt it because it was so difficult, so much pressure on them, that there was that demand avoidance due to all of that pressure, that fear of failure. Right, I'm going to check in. Yeah, Sarah has put it in the chat. Thank you. Just going to check in on the chat. There was quite a lot going on there. How do you deal with this sort of situation? Do you still ask them to put it away, or is it better not to ask and you just do it? So demand avoidance strategies, the fixed choices can often go well. So do you want to put the plates away or the bowls away? I'll show you. Excuse me. So I'm going to put one plate away, I'm going to put one bowl away. Do you want to put the rest of the bowls on top of that bowl, or do you want to put the rest of the plates on top of that plate? You choose. You're in control. Some children will respond better to the hidden third choice. So right, I'm going to put that plate away there. So you can put the plates away. Or you can put the bowls away, and I'll show you I've started it off. That's where the plates go. That's where the bowls go. You choose. And while I'm saying you choose, I'm also going to put this cup on the side here. That's where the cups go. And I'm going to be holding the next cup to go while I'm asking you, do you want to do the plates or the bowls? You choose. Do you want to do the plates or the bowls? Verbally, I'm offering two options, plates or bowls, you choose. I'm using that script at the end. You choose. You let me know. Plates or bowls, you choose. Verbally, two options, plates or bowls. But physically, I've got a third option because I'm holding the cup. So I've verbalized two of my options. Sorry, did anyone else just see a load of balloons just appear on my screen? Yes, okay, I'm not having a stroke. That's good. I don't know why that happened. Where was I? Yes, sorry, yeah. Plates or bowls. Verbalize two of the options, and one of them is a physical option. So I've actually got a physical option, the cups. Do you want to put the plates away or the bowls away? But I'm holding a cup, and I've already shown you where the cups go. So you've got three options, but I've only mentioned two of them. Sometimes that hidden third option can work quite well. So, oh, do you want to, right, I've noticed you haven't drunk very much today. Do you want to have do you want to have some squash or some water? And I ask you that, squash or water, you let me know, as I just happen to be holding the orange juice on the side. So I've got the third option physically. Sometimes if the options aren't always, you know, if the yeah, sometimes if you don't verbalize all of the options, but you still present another choice, your child may go for the non-verbal option. That may be something to go through. But that's kind of more demand avoidant strategies. But what we're going to go through now is Chris Russell's Big Bank of Strategies and Resources. That would have been a nice time for the balloons. We're going to go through a lot of strategies and resources that you can use to support your anxious child, to support them to understand what that anxiety is, what it means, why it's happening, how to express it, and how to cope with it. Now, the first thing I'm going to talk about is the energy bank accounts. If any of you have ever seen me talk before, if I ever have a captive audience, I will bring up the energy bank account because I still think they are the best thing in the world. And they are the best thing in the world because everybody has one. I have one, you have one, everyone has an energy bank account. I just didn't realize it until I saw it. Now, for many neurodiverse children, they're very logical thinkers, and being anxious is a very illogical problem a lot of the time. So this puts a bit of a logical solution on an illogical problem. So the energy bank account. So it was Professor Tony Attwood designed these with a 15-year-old girl. And what he did was he put a numerical value between 0 and 100 of all of the things that withdraw energy from the energy bank account, things that stress you out, you find difficult to cope with, cause you anxiety, what withdraws your energy. And often it's anxiety that withdraws your energy. We're not mentioning the word anxiety or feelings. We're saying, what are the things that withdraw energy from your bank account? And what are the things that deposit energy into your energy bank account? How do you get the energy back in? So this 15-year-old girl, she said that being late to school cost her between 10 and 40 points. It was withdrawn from her energy bank account. Depending on how late she was for school, was everyone in the form group going to stare at her? Being in crowds, depending on the size and duration, withdrew between 20 and 60 points. Her mum being annoyed at her because her mum was the world. Her mum was her absolute world. If her mum was annoyed with her, that could withdraw between 30 and 100 points from her energy bank account. Her friends being bitchy in class, her words, not mine, withdraw between 20 and 30 points from the energy bank account. The noise in class, depending on the duration, pitch, and volume, 20 and 30 points withdrawn. So at the end of the day, you have a look at your transactions for the day. What has my bank account been subject to today? How much energy has been withdrawn? At the end of the day, you have a numerical value of things that have, perhaps been that accumulative stress. You then know, how much do I need to deposit into my bank account to put that back in again, to balance the books, balance it back to zero. Now, this girl had an intense interest in Harry Potter. So reading Harry Potter deposited between 30 and 80 points. Solitude was a real protective factor for her. Actually just having time on her own, away from her family, away from her friends, just on her own. That was a really good one for her. That deposited between 20 and 80 points back into her bank account. Drawing, her favourite Harry Potter scene, hand-eye coordination, quite mindful, deposits between 20 and 60 points back in. Talking to boys at school, because teenage boys were much more straightforward with their language than teenage girls. So that deposits between 10 and 30 points back in. And meeting her sensory needs by being on the trampoline in the garden. She would seek out that feeling of where her body is in space, that proprioception. So jumping on the trampoline deposited between 20 and 30 points back in. So at the end of the day, they had quite a logical solution on how to counteract the things that you find difficult throughout the day, can lead to burnout, and schedule things that give you a sense of enjoyment. So when you're very anxious, it can be easy to say, I haven't got time to look after myself. I haven't got time to read my book. I need to think about the problems. I need to try and solve it. I don't feel right. I'm not going to go out for a coffee with my friends. I'm just not feeling right at the moment. Whereas the energy bank account puts a logical solution to an illogical thought process. That might be something to try with your child. Now, I'm going to touch upon... Oh, no, I'm not. I'm going to go off on a tangent instead. Interests. We spoke a lot about interests earlier. Hyperfixations, they're called in the ADHD community, or intense interests, special interests in the autistic community, whatever you call it, passions, interests. Interests to a neurodivergent is what mindfulness is to a neurotypical. So we all know mindfulness is, it's packaged concentration. You sit and clear your mind of thoughts and focus on one thing at a time. You clear distractions, you're better able to focus. You're not thinking about all thoughts at once, all those racing thoughts. You're just focusing on one thing at a time. That's mindfulness. Your typical mindfulness techniques are unlikely to work with your neurodivergent child, because there's a lot of visual processing skills you need, a lot of kind of visual imagination. You imagine you're on a beach and you're sniffing a strawberry and blowing out a candle, and they go, oh, no, I'm not. I'm in a classroom in Hatfield. Therefore, if you replace that with an intense interest, a hyperfixation, a special interest, a passion, whatever you call it, often a neurodiverse brain will be so passionately interested in something, all of those other distractions and thoughts and sensory inputs are put to the side, are ignored. You know, have you ever seen your child be completely in the zone with their interest, their intense interest, if they have one? When you're completely in the zone, that is a form of mindfulness, because you're not thinking about, am I going to be late to school again tomorrow? What if I can't find my PE kit? Did I say the right thing at break time? Did I not? Is my cousin angry with me because of the way I responded to them when I was trying to be polite, but maybe I got it wrong? You're not thinking about all of those extra anxious thoughts. You are just focusing on that one thing and blocking out a lot of other stimulus. So time to engage in interests is a form of mindfulness to a lot of neurodiverse children. No, the slide hasn't moved on because I went on a tangent there and I hadn't prepared a slide for it. So I just had to freestyle that one. But I will move on now. Next is the emotional literacy. So emotional literacy is understanding and expressing your own emotions. We spoke about this earlier when we spoke about alexithymia, having language for your feelings. It was first defined by Claude Steiner in 1997. I will include that in, firstly, for respect to Claude, and secondly, because if you ever have or who in 1997 first defined emotional literacy come up in the pub quiz, you'll instantly think back to this moment and you will know that it is Claude Steiner. And I would absolutely love an email to say Claude Steiner came up in my pub quiz, if that ever does happen. I'm waiting my whole career for this moment to happen, and one day it will. So it was first defined by Claude Steiner in 1997, and emotional literacy improves relationships, creates loving possibilities between people, makes cooperative work possible, and facilitates the feeling of community. Now, feeling part of a community, no matter what that community is, having improved relationships and having loving possibilities, all reduces your levels of anxiety because you are literate in your own emotions. You can express how you feel. Now, there are 5 stages to emotional literacy. You will know which stage your child is on. So, there we go. Sorry, I froze for a second then. Right. There are 5 stages. You will know which step your child is on. Step 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Again, there is no inherent link between your academic capabilities and your emotional literacy. And this is something that can be taught over time. Step 1, knowing your feelings, knowing what your feelings are called. That's step 1, knowing the name of my emotions. We always start with happy and sad, or happy and mad, happy and angry. They're often the 2 most prominent ones in a child's life, the easiest ones to recognize. And then we build up towards the more complex emotions. If any of you are using flashcards, please use flashcards of actual real life people, ideally people that your child knows, because there are so many children that I've worked with over the years who are brilliant at recognizing how the blue cartoon bear feels in the picture, but have no idea when their mum is angry with them. So please use pictures of real people and just use emotive language. Discuss what makes you feel different emotions. Use emotive language. Talk about how you feel. Make that language a part of your everyday conversations. Your child won't have the language for emotions if they don't hear it. And name emotions for your child. You look like you're feeling cross to me. There's a bit of a safety net with you look like you're feeling, because you're not saying you definitely are. Because they might not be cross, they might actually be really embarrassed or really frustrated. But you're saying what that looks like to me. And the reason we do this is we label objects verbally all the time. Your child picks up a pen and you go, oh, you've got a pen, you're holding a pen, look at your pen, lovely pen, pass me the pen. And I've labelled that pen verbally 6 times in 10 seconds. I've labelled that pen. And the child goes and picks up the ball. Oh, you've got the ball. Look at the ball. Can you throw me the ball? Show me the ball. What colour's the ball? And we've labelled that the ball, the ball. If we start to put a label on emotions, on the non-physical items, your child is more likely to know what they are called because you are labelling the emotion, just like we label the objects. You will also label them wrong at times, because your child won't be upset. They'll feel isolated sometimes. Or they might not be angry, they might be embarrassed. So you will get it wrong, but we give that emotional language. Start to give that language. Tell your child what their emotions are called. Support them with labelling the ones that you think you can identify. Use flashcards of real people if you want to use flashcards. You can also use real people having an argument in the street. Well, they were shouting at each other when we walked past. I think they might be a bit angry. Well, that person in Tesco looked really happy. You can use real people. Again, EastEnders, things like that. Soap operas are very over-emotive as well. does anyone call them soap operas anymore, or am I just from 1984? Soaps, those TV programs. Label people on the TV with real human faces. Use real people and start to give that emotional language to know what the feelings are called. Use pictures of real people. They can be men covered in chalk with overemphasized faces. They don't have to be, but it's a nice talking point. And describe them. So this child here says, what does joy feel like? Well, they said joy is running on the playground. That's when I feel joy. Mum's hugs. That's when I feel joy. Being with my family on Christmas morning, getting a puppy. That one's a hint. Being with my best friend, winning the championship. My brother coming home from war. Finishing a tough Lego set. That's when I feel joy. We've got a detailed description of what joy is. So it's been very explicitly taught what that emotion is. Okay, that's step one. Step two is having a sense of empathy. Excuse me. Step two, we apply this knowledge of feelings and recognize that everyone else has those feelings as well. It may be more difficult in autistic children or neurodiverse children to explicitly teach empathy rather than expect it to, rather than just expecting it to develop. We may have to explicitly teach it, which can be quite difficult, but it's doable. Have any of you heard the myth that's hopefully dead and buried now? Autistic people don't have empathy, do they? Hopefully no one hears that myth anymore. If you do, you are legally allowed to slap them. It's because it's not true in the slightest. Some of my autistic friends and colleagues are some of the most empathetic people I know. So please don't listen to anyone that says that. When we start with empathy, we use the same process. We start with happy, and we go, right, these are all the things that make you happy. Do you think everyone has that same sense of happiness from the same things that you do? Here's you and here's Mrs. Smith. You both really like Doctor Who. You like playing tennis, but Mrs. Smith likes running. That's what makes her happy. You like dinosaurs and hugs. Mrs. Smith prefers reading. That's what makes her happy. You really like Harry Potter and drawing. Mrs. Smith likes cooking and watching TV. That's what makes her happy. You can do a visual, you can do diagrams like this one, you can do a Venn diagram, you can make lists and compare lists. You make it explicit and you recognize that actually emotions aren't just explicit to me. Everyone has emotions and we respond differently to different things. So we start with happy, we can move on to sad, do the things that make me sad, make other people feel sad. Do I do things that make other people feel sad? Do I have an impact on other people's emotions? Do they have an impact on mine? So, you absolutely love singing at the top of your lungs. It makes you so happy. Does everybody in the library like you singing at the top of your lungs? You can explore the differences. Step two, having a sense of empathy. Step three, learning to manage your emotions. How do I respond appropriately? So I know what they are. I know it's not just me that has them. Step three, how do I manage these emotions? How do I respond to them? You'll hear the term self-regulating a lot. How do I regulate my emotions? How do I regulate my anxiety? How do I do to bring it back down, regulate it to a typical level? You can't self-regulate until you can co-regulate. Your child will need you as a parent, carer. They will need someone to co-regulate with them. You cannot just go straight to no regulation to self-regulation. Your child will need to use you to show them how to do it. You will need to teach how to regulate. Now, there are lots of ways we can do that. We have a big bank of strategies that are coming in a moment that will relate to all of these 5 steps. One I'm quite a fan of is temper tamers. If I'm quite anxious, quite worked up, or angry. And remember, anger can be a representation of anxiety or low mood in neurodiverse children, especially. We pull out an idea from the temper tamer. It's a bit of paper with an activity on it. So go and do 5 press-ups, do 6 sit-ups, do a lap of the garden. You can make your own with things that you know your child will engage with. You may also borrow some of these from our lending library or lending space. We also have some available to borrow before you choose to either buy your own or make your own. But this can be a way to manage your emotions. I quite like these. Another reason I like them isn't, especially for demand avoiders, it's not saying, you're very angry, you need to go for a lap of the playground, you need to go for a lap of the garden. Because that's you telling a child what to do. Whereas if a child goes and picks one at random from a pot, it's the pot suggesting it, not you. It takes the demand avoidance element out of it. It's an inanimate object that's giving an idea rather than you giving an instruction as a parent carer. So I quite like these, but we have more strategies coming up as well. Step 4, self-awareness, understanding what causes different emotions. Understanding and accepting that emotions are difficult to deal with sometimes. They're not always easy. Sometimes it is difficult to regulate. Sometimes it's harder than others. And you may not see primary age children on step 4 having that self-awareness. You might, but yeah, generally you see this kind of develop from kind of 11 plus. But yes, step 4 is your self-awareness. What causes different emotions? So I know personally full well, if I go to a party, if I stay much party night, I get very much diminished returns. I don't enjoy myself. I'm ready to go, definitely by midnight. If I stay longer than that, I know that I will feel overwhelmed and ready to go and I won't enjoy it. Whereas if I leave, sounding very much like Cinderella here, aren't I? If I leave before midnight, I know that I will have a much better time. So I'm aware of that. I'm also aware that if I go to Big Tesco on a Saturday afternoon, I will feel angry and want to cry and want to leave because it's horrible. It's predicting that emotional response. I know that I'm not a huge fan of going into London. I find it so very busy. I would much prefer a walk on my own in the countryside because that's how I cope with my emotions. That's what my emotional reactions are like. Over time, your child will be able to predict their own emotional reactions as well and start to understand what I can do to cope and know when I'm going to feel anxious, when I'm not, when I'm going to feel happy, what will make me feel good, what will make me feel worse. Being responsible for your own emotions. Step 4, self-awareness. And step 5 is putting it all together, emotional interactivity. It's knowing what a feeling is, knowing it's not exclusive to you, how to react to them, and what makes you feel them in the first place. It's this firing off all at once. This is emotional interactivity. Okay, we now have a big bank of resources that we're going to go through that will support with those 5 steps. And here they are. So I'll start with the observation schedule for stress. That might be a bit small on some of your screens, but don't worry, it's in the handout. The observation schedule for stress is there for identifying patterns. So what's my anxiety level like at school on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, morning, afternoon, evening? What's my child like? What happens to their anxiety levels or their stress levels throughout the week? In Hertfordshire, a majority of schools use something called Hertfordshire Steps. Hertfordshire Steps is Hertfordshire's preferred approach to behaviour. It's a therapeutic behaviour response to support children to be more emotionally literate and engage in pro-social behaviour instead of antisocial. So if your child is in school in Hertfordshire, they may well use Hertfordshire Steps, where they have what is called anxiety mapping, where they may map anxiety levels throughout the week. If your child's school is already doing this, it may be worth joining up so you have it at school and at home, and you're working together with school. And you may identify a pattern. Now, I'll use one example. There was a family I was working with, and a child was always going into school really dysregulated on a Thursday morning, very dysregulated, very heightened anxiety levels. And what we realized was, by using an observation schedule or anxiety mapping, it was always Thursday mornings that they came in very heightened. So we were able to work with the family, with the young person who wasn't able to communicate why. So he needed advocacy for that. And it turns out Thursday morning was bin day. So on his way to school, he had the smell of the bin lorries in between his house and the school as he walked. The bins were all over the pavement, so sometimes he had to walk in the road and back in again. And everyone had always taught him that you never walk in the road, especially when there's lots of cars going to school, going to shops, going to work. So he had to break rules. There was a sensory overload from the smell of the bins, the sound of the bin lorry. A lot of people backed up, often beeping each other. So actually, those Thursday mornings were really difficult for him because it was bin day. So once we knew that, we were able to schedule in on a Thursday morning some downtime. So he'd come into school quite heightened because of the bin day. The first thing he did when he arrived, he would have some time to regulate on his own, some solitude away from the class, rather than going straight into doing guided reading or maths or English. You'd have some time to regulate because we recognised that pattern. We also knew that if there was a bank holiday Monday, the bin days would get pushed back, so it'd be the Friday morning that we needed to schedule that. And the cover teacher that worked only on Friday mornings needed to know. So that observation schedules are a tool to support your child's anxiety. You need to know what, when it is and what are the causes. Other things you can use, the stress bucket. I like the stress bucket because it makes the conceptual into a physical. Go and get yourself a bucket and a container to fill the bucket and some water. You pick up your bucket, it has no stress in it. Stress is represented with water. Very easy to carry around. It's fine. But if you have poor concept of time, you struggle with deadlines, your executive functioning, ADHD, time blindness, pour some water in. That can cause you some stress throughout the day. So that on its own, you pick it up in the bucket, so yeah, it's okay, I can lift that. It's not going to spill out. A bit easier if it wasn't there, but it's fine. If I don't always understand the rules that everyone else just seems to get. I need written rules as opposed to unwritten rules. I don't understand why the unwritten rules are there. That's how my brain works. Quite stressful. Pour another container in. Very anxious about failure, that fear of failure, fear of ridicule we spoke about earlier. Another cup goes into the bucket. Sensory needs. I need to have my sensory needs met. Pour it into the water. I interpret things really literally. So when people talk figuratively or in abstract thought, I find that very difficult and I have to translate that. Pour that into the bucket. Difficulties with communication, pour that into the bucket. I'm quite anxious about transitions, changes in routine, what's going to happen. Pour a bucket in. Before time, that stress actually gets quite difficult to walk around with. I pick it up and it's actually quite heavy, or it might actually start spilling out and it becomes too much. So you can do your own. You can do this activity and follow it up with writing to remind your child what, how stress works, that accumulative stress. We can also talk about what affects the size of your bucket. Some days you wake up and you have a whole bucket's worth of stress that you can fill and carry up. Sometimes it's a jug, sometimes it's a cup, sometimes it's a thimble before it starts overflowing. We talk about different sensitivities on different days. We can also, a bit like the energy bank account, show what takes stress out of your stress bucket as well. Having time to my own takes stress out and it's easier to carry around once I've had time on my own. Sleep. helps with my anxiety and my stress and makes it easier to carry around. Being around animals and nature and not people, that takes it out of my stress bucket and makes it easier to carry around. So you can use that concept. These are all in the handout, by the way. Another one, the emotion thermometer. I like this. So for children on step 1, what are my emotions? Are you happy, sad, embarrassed, isolated, worried, tired? Or how am I feeling on a scale of 1 to 5? Point to it and show me. It's a much more linear method of communication. Instead of having to label your emotions and put them into speech, you can show me on the thermometer, which is say a number or a colour or point to it. It's always a good idea if you can to get your child to label what they think each one is called. Use the child's voice. This might be quite an effective way of identifying your emotions. That sense of empathy, step 2, can develop if you as a parent carer start to use this as well. I'm feeling a bit of a 3 right now, so I think I'm going to go and sit down and watch a film. And I think I'll feel a 2 or a 1 after that. So you start to model this, that sense of empathy that other people have their own emotion thermometers as well. Easier way of communicating. You don't have to use that complex thought processes. You can just use numbers or point. And you can do them in all sorts. It can be a thermometer. It can be I've had it up to here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I would use a picture of your child rather than this dishevelled boy, if I were you. But you can use whatever you like. You can use, I'm a big fan of this. Ben wrote this himself, and you can tell that Ben wrote this himself because this is called Ben's angry/pissed off scale. Ben says he's taken the 1 to 5s, instead of just numbering them or labeling them what they're called, he said, what do they look like? What do they feel like? And what can I try to do? So this is steps 1 and 3 all in once. Step 1, understanding the emotions, and the step 3, what do I do with them? They've got a so what box on the end. I can try to. So Ben's getting there. Number 1, it feels like none. Looks like none. I can try to talk to a safe person and keep doing what I'm doing. Number 2, it feels like not happy. It feels like I'm keeping to myself, but I'm still with other people, still with others. So he knows that if he's still with others, but feeling a bit off, that's a 2, because he's got a good description of it there. What does it feel like? He's not sure yet. We can update it later. I can try to talk to a safe person and use deep breathing. 3, he said, is not talking and a little bit of swearing. That's how he knows he's on a 3. What does it feel like? Upset. That's what he's labelling it as. I can try to go and get a drink. I also like the fact it says I can try to. It's less prescriptive, less likely to trigger off of demand avoidance. Step 4, what does it look like? Swearing. What does it feel like? Mad. What can I try to do? Leave the room with permission and go somewhere safe. He has a so what on there. Step 5 is swearing, breaking stuff, clenching my teeth and wide-eyed. He's got a really good description of what a 5 looks like to him. Because Ben's 5 will probably be very different to what your child's 5 is, or what your personal 5 is. What does it feel like? It feels like feels like I want to break something, feels like I would explode. I can try to help me leave and take a walk with me. We want someone to help get him out of the room and go for a walk. That's how he needs support. This is a really effective emotional literacy tool. You can also have a volcano. Again, this one's slightly less personal than Ben's, but it has a description of what it is and what that looks like, or what you can try to do. If your child needs a bit of a prompt. These are all on the handout. I appreciate they've come up a bit small on my screen. They might be a bit small on yours, but yes, these will be in the handout as well. You can also do a happy book. I like a happy book. doesn't just have to be a happy book, but we start with a happy book. We take a big picture, what your child's face looks like when they are happy. Page 2, we then describe, what does my face look like? What are my eyes doing? What does my mouth do when I'm happy? What does my hand do when I'm happy? What happens to my voice when I'm happy? Page 3, I get other pictures of happy people. This is what my mum and my dad look like when they're happy, my brother and my sister, my aunt and my uncle, my friends at school. That's what they look like when they're happy. And there we have a short story on what happiness is. We then explore angry or sad. We can then explore the more complex emotions, worried. You can write a book on each emotion. And we can also, if your child needs some support to regulate, that's step 3. Nearly forgot how to hold up 3 fingers there. 3, a relaxation book. So these are, again, similar to the Temper Tamers. A relaxation book will give you a bit of guided things to do when you're feeling heightened. This might feed into your 5-point scales. When I'm feeling a 3, I can try to find my relaxation book and do it for 5 minutes. You get lots of ideas in there. I can hold the ball tightly and squeeze, and then let go and relax. I can make a monster face, and then let go and relax. I can squeeze a ball with my shoulders and my cheek, and then let go and relax. It gives physical, tangible ideas of what to do when you feel heightened. And also, if you can identify through your 5-point scale, through your relaxation book, through your happy book, through conversations with parents and carers, that I need to go and make a monster face and squeeze the ball tightly, that's an indication that I feel anxious, which makes you more armed to communicate that and more armed to ask for help. And that is it from me this morning. Thank you all so much for your time. I've had a really pleasurable Tuesday morning. It's been lovely talking with you all. I'm going to hand over to Sarah for a quick note about our feedback and future training. So Sarah, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you, everyone. I have just put the feedback form into the chat. If you could just spare us a couple of minutes just to fill that in, it's very important for us. It ensures that our training is reaching you in the best possible way. If you have any requests, and also just helps us keep everything relevant. But one of the most important things is that whilst it is free for you to attend our sessions, it is not free for us to run these. And it enables us to go out and seek more funding to enable us to keep helping our parent carer community as best as possible. So please, if you do get a chance to fill that in, that would be wonderful. If you do not, it will be there when I send you out the link to this